Okay, my wonderful friends, another day at Mud Fossil University, and what are we going to do today? Well, we're going to talk about blood flow and how it works in feet. And then I'm going to show you some samples of mud fossils that are feet and toes. And I can show you another one that you will know extremely well and show you the specific evidence that proves it's a foot. And that you will see in a minute, and that is at Stonehenge. Stonehenge is not just some sarson stones they took from some 20, 30, 50 miles away. It was the body of a giant creature. Now, I have some right here in my shop that I will show you the same stuff, the same sarson stone. Now, before we get there, though, I want to show you a toe I have here in my shop. It's from a giant foot. And the toe itself is about a foot long. And it's a big toe, and it has a callus on it. It's just unbelievable. Wait till you see it. It's just phenomenal. But before we get there, look at the different blue and the red. It says, why are my toes turning blue? You have artery blood, which is red. It's loaded with oxygen. As it goes through your body, everybody says, oh, I could use some of that, I could use some of that oxygen, and it sucks it all out of that blood. By the time it gets to your feet, it's not completely oxygenated, but it should still have pretty good oxygen. Now, they're talking about cutting off your blood supply and so forth. I don't care about that. What I care about is this. At the end of each one of these toes, let me see if I can get in there real tight. This camera doesn't focus all that well. Well, anyway, you should be able to see this. You got a blue and a red at the tip of each toe. So you got a dot and a dot, a dot and a dot, a dot and a dot, and they go right down the line. And they bring the blood over from one side of the toe to the other. That's what they call the terminals. That's the end, and your fingers are the same thing. Let me show you in a hand. It becomes a little more obvious. Okay, in your feet, the same thing happens. Your artery comes down, and it's red blood, and it just flushes through your system. There's no clamps on the artery, none whatsoever. So it can go this way, it can go forward, it can go backwards, it doesn't matter. The vein is a whole different story. Now, there's a real nasty little spot with heavy-duty blood right in this area, which is underneath your toenail and your fingernail, and I'll show you that in a second. Now, you see these three here? Boom, boom, boom. That's on the arterial side. That'll blow right out of there. There's no restrictions. On the vein side coming back, totally different story. They clamp off so the blood cannot go backwards. Now, I think it probably is, this is probably the artery side and this is the vein side because it's a little bit smaller, you see? A little bit bigger, a little smaller, a little bigger, a little smaller. The bigger side would probably be the artery, but it doesn't matter. What I'm talking about here is you're going to have two spots on this side of the finger, two spots on the end, and two spots on the other side. And the red spots will just blow completely out. I have a fingertip that's so heavily eroded. Well, let me show it to you, and I'll explain it as I show it to you. I don't know how much you're going to be able to see here, but this was that bone black pattern right there is what's called a distal phalanges. This right here is the vein, and the vein does not blow out. The arteries completely blow out. And there's the artery on the side. You see, just like on there. Artery, artery, and artery on the end. All blown out, completely blown out, because this is the artery side, no clamps. Now, what about this side? That clamp didn't blow out. This clamp didn't blow out. This tip at the end didn't blow out. And that's what the bone black pattern is of a distal phalanges. And this, you can still see the vein itself is still here. Because it doesn't deteriorate the way red blood just flushes right out. And then it fills in with quartz usually. They call them veins of quartz. They're actually arteries of quartz. Alright, so we know that there's a blood supply coming down and one going back. And at the very tip of each one of these toes, there's two spots. There's the vein blood and there's the artery blood. Now, if this foot was tipped up and the toes were sticking up, what would it look like? What would that foot look like if it was the heel stone at Stonehenge? Alright, here's the things to consider. There's a heavy-duty supply of blood going in and out back where the heel is. And then there's these tips at the tips of the toes. And then there's a flush of blood that's right around this area here, which starts to supply all of these different branches. So there's going to be a dense spot here. There's going to be tips of the toes are going to have blood supplies. And there's going to be some black and red blood at the bottom of the heel. We may only see one or the other. Let's take a look at Stonehenge. Alright, let's just take a general look at things. This flat spot right here would be where the leg comes up. And they break pretty flat because of tendons. Tendons have a tendency to break along certain planes, and that's what that is. Now, what is this black here? I believe that is the vein. And that's the heavy-duty vein that comes down, that big blue one. And then over this side, I believe if you looked at it closely, you'd see that it was the red, which is hematite, which is red blood. Right? Because it has to be fed with both. Now, here again, you've got two holes here. And that's what feeds this arterial and vein network up. Now, remember I talked about the tips of the toes? It doesn't get any clearer than this. You see those two dots? Let me get up close up there. Again, this camera does not focus well, but that seems to be pretty good. You see at the tips, the two dots on each one of them? See the two dots, two dots, two dots, two dots? These are the toes. Those are the toes, and these are the terminal blood supply and return. Now, if you could see this one, the side of the big toe, I'm sure you could find a callus over here. And you're going to see the red and black blood is going to be everywhere. There'll be some of each. Now, I believe it was laying on this side because all my mud fossils and all the fossils that I have found from this event, which didn't happen all that long ago, it was only 3,500 years ago, according to Velikovsky. And all of this stuff, everything I have found is just laying on the top of the earth. So nothing's buried here. And all of my stuff is also sarson stone and basalts, feldspar with one flat side and one perfect side. And I'll show you my fingertips, and they're DNA tested. And I've got a toe here that I got to show you. This is very cool. But I believe it was laying on that side. From the flood, they just laid there. One side was flat, and the rest of it was pretty well preserved. And the reason they could preserve so well is because, as Velikovsky's account says, Venus was literally born from Jupiter. It came out of Jupiter. And at that time it was a fiery comet. And it came and almost hit Earth. Literally almost hit Earth. It took 7 days of watching it. And these are all recorded histories. This is not something I'm making up. It's not something he's making up. Everybody in the world, every single culture had the same story, the same timeline. 3,500 years ago, 1500 BC, Venus approached Earth for 7 days, and it got brighter and brighter and brighter. And they say it was more intense than the sun, or by a huge factor. And it was literally roasting the Earth on its way. And then it combusted with our atmosphere, which is mostly hydrogen and oxygen when you get way out into the way out on the edge of the edge of our atmosphere, and it slapped it hard and burnt it, and at the same time combusted and pushed the hydrogen into the oxygen and created H2O instead of OH. H2O is water. And the slap was so hot that it came down boiling water. That's what preserved all this stuff. It was really roasted and parboiled. And it cooked all the salts out of it, and all, you know, there was a lot of chemistry, because these creatures were absolutely stunningly gigantic. And I mean, you just have no idea. You couldn't even possibly imagine the size. All of that chemistry was flushed into the waters of the oceans, everywhere. And it stabilized in certain ways. Now I'm going to show you a giant toe here in a second, which is right there. We're going to be looking at it closely in a second. But what you have to understand is that the body chemistry in you is primarily, the blood is metals and water. And when it drains out through you in your body chemistry and becomes effluent, which is like, you know, watery flow out of your body, and all right, you have to consider which way the guy died. I say his foot was laying this way, and his body would have been splayed out this way. There's a lot of places in your body for things to run out. So they wouldn't drain through the foot like the toe that I'm going to be showing you in a second was primarily where all the blood drained, because the guy must have been standing up and his toe had all the blood draining out. This wouldn't happen. Your blood would drain up somewhere in your midsection. It would blow out through some of the weakest parts. These are pretty tough spots to blow out. And I'll show you this one here. Wait till you see this toe. All right, this is a toe from a big toe. I mean, it's a big toe from a big foot. Now, this is where the toenail was. This is the spot where the real heavy blood comes running out of there underneath the toenail. The toenail is right here. This is a callus. Wait till you see this callus. It'll blow your mind. Now, remember I said the artery sides always blow the blood right out? This is the one case that it didn't happen. And that's because this callus is so hard. It packed in that blood so tight, it had to blow out through the vein side. This is just totally never happens. But I will show you. And this is the vein side. You see the black here? That's where the vein blood actually blew backwards. All right. Now, if you can see, I'm going to put a little water on, but you can see this is like a wrapping. They used to call it the tunica, which is, it's the, I guess they call it the periosteum. It's a layer of collagen fibers that wrap all the bones. Every bone is wrapped completely. Like this little bone here, same thing. And you can actually see where they seal together. You see that right there? I don't know if you can or not. You see that seam? They all have seams where the tunica wrapped together and held the bone internal. So that's like the membrane. All right, and this is that seam, and there's one on the front too. I'll show you these stuff. I got to make it wet so you see it real well. But this side is the one. Oh, you never see that. You see that black right there? That black is the vein blood. Remember we talked about artery and vein blood, how the vein is normally blue, but in the mud fossils it turns black. There it is. And this is the side of your toe that holds up, pushes up against your second toe. And this is this gigantic callus. Look at this. Look at that thing. Can you imagine? We're going to look at this in the microscope. But you see, again, here's the seams. You see the seams? Here's the seams. They all have seams. And this is the underneath, and I'm going to show you the fabrics that make up grip skin, which is, this is grip skin, friction skin, which is the toe, your fingers, tips, your palms, your toes, your feet. You do a lot of work with those particular spots. Now, we're going to look at this, because what happened with this one is it had to die something like in this position, where the blood ran down and tried to get out, and it couldn't get out here. It couldn't get out. It was packed in. It's just like putting a heavy-duty bandage on here. So what did it do? It blew out this side because it's under pressure. This is where the vein sides are. There's not supposed to be any blood coming out of there. Those are the two. Remember I showed you on the other thing? Those are the two spots right there. There's one, and there's two. All right, the tip has the same thing, but it blew out these spots, and this is just one of a kind. That's the first I've ever seen. All right, that's the distal phalanges bone black pattern. And if you looked at this carefully, I had to put some water on so that it would bring the color out. You see this little spot right there? That's the tip of the bone. That's where the end of the bone comes out. And of course the artery and the vein. And this was just one of the tips of the fingers that came out. Other ones were better off. They were less eroded and shot. Like this one here. This one here is perfectly, preserved because it wasn't in the same. It was probably up higher, and the other one was lower. Now I broke that off so you get some blood out of there. This is where the bone is on this one, and this one I believe is a thumb because the bone is offset. And it's been CAT scanned, been DNA tested. The fingernail's right in the same area as the other one has a fingernail. The apical tuft is right there. That right there is the embedded tendons. And then of course it has the pads underneath. And that apical tuft is one from an eroded fingertip. That's the apical tuft that sits right at the end of fingertips. And it has all these holes and balls in those holes, and that's what anchors your finger. All right, there's the palm of the hand. It's the left hand. That's the cleave in between your two pads of your hand. That's where the bumper lays. You have a tendon that runs down here, and this is cut off just before the knuckles. And I have some knuckles and stuff too. Here's one right here. It just looks like a piece of clay. But guess what? Look at this right here. Because that, my friend, is a bone. That is the bone ball, which is the same knuckle right on your knuckle there. That big knuckle. And I can guarantee you that, because on the other side it didn't erode as much, and it still has the muscle. You see that? That's still the muscle. And this is a tendon. It runs down from this flat tendon here, that is the tendon right on the back of your finger. And it was laying dead like this. All of this eroded off because it was out in it eroded. Tendons they're not erodible like red fleshy stuff. Even bone, very erodible compared to tendons. That is a tendon, and right at the very end, that's the abrupt transition. I don't know if you can see that, but there's usually, you can see the dot at the very end if you get it in the right light, which I believe that you should be able to see it right there. All right. Now, that comes down and meets with the muscle, which lets you do this. So we're running down here, and then this comes right down this way. And this is the muscle that runs around the bone ball. And on the other side, it's so eroded away that just the bone ball is there. Now, this is the red muscle and tendon that was in there. That's still a little bit of blood left in there. But again, it died laying flat like this. So this was pretty heavily eroded. My other giant, and this was DNA tested. My other giant's DNA tested. It's flawless. And it is sarson stone as well, I guarantee you. You see this? Sarson stones. The heel stone, that's where the guy's feet were. This is where his main body was. They rebuilt this, so I don't know what it was like when it was originally built. But I'm going to show you some sarson stone. And this is going to be what it looks like right here. Exact same thing that's on Stonehenge. And let me show you where it came from. All right, take your time and look at this carefully. This is a fingertip. All the way from there to here is the length of the fingertip. This is the fingernail. That's the fingernail. That right there is the blood supplies. Remember I showed you on the one that all eroded out? There was a vein and an artery. There it is. This little pad there is the circular pad that goes between your bones so they don't scrub together and scrape. Now, this was almost 36 inches long. I called it 36-inch tip. Now, this is sarson stone. And I'll show you a little closer shot of it. And it was complete. There was no, this was attached. I slammed that with a hammer and broke this off so that I could get down where the blood was, because you can't get it from the outside. This sarson stone, the outside is just really gritty, granity, basalty, tough stuff. And that's why they think it's very, very old. It's not. Alright, like I say, this is on my property. It's still here. And these are the sweat pores and the fingerprint ridges. You see the fingerprint ridges, sweat pores? And this particular stuff is just exactly like this. It was just stuck on there. I slapped it with a hammer, it popped right off. And here it is right here. There's this piece right here. And that's what sarson stone looks like. And you see underneath there? That's the membrane right here. It just popped right off like it was stuck on there like a scab. And this, my thumb, is approximately one fingerprint thickness, one ridge width. Okay, so I figured the guy would be about 160 feet tall, something like that, the bigger one. The other one, the mud one, which is turned into mudstone, totally different, totally different. The mudstone is, it was in a muddy, completely muddy situation for extremely long time. These were petrified during this event that Velikovsky talks about, this being cooked from Venus hitting us almost. And then they dried out, not instantly, but you know, the thing took a long time to finish up. But they're cooked, they're cleaned up, they're water's running through them, and then now they're turning really hard. Just like this foot here. This is a foot from a new species nobody's ever known about before. It's called no toes. The toes are built in. And this again, that'd be sarson stone right there. That's sarson stone. Right? This is all feldspar on the outside. And you're going to find a lot of feldspar where the sarson stone is too. And this is a new species. You see right there? I don't know if you can see that or not. But there's a little pin there. A little pin, and then there's springs. And the springs work to do the work in here instead of tendons. But everything else is basically the same. It has a little bone in the back and the fibula on the side, and you know, the arch of the foot, and all that stuff is the same. Now, I'm pretty sure I showed you this, but something I want you to pay attention to after we were looking at that grip skin is this is the grip skin that's on the palm of this huge hand. Now, where you come up here, it's not as strappy as it is down here. See how it's all silvery and peeling off? This is the bumper pad, and that's the cleave in between your two bumpers. And then your thumb goes off this way, and then all the other parts I showed you from that hand. That came out of a very small spot, was dug up, put in a very small office, and not deep at all. But that's why it was in the mud, and it was turned to mud. All my other stuff was above ground. Above ground. And everybody's sending me stuff from above ground. Some stuff is buried and has eroded, but it's still recognizable. Remember I showed you my foot, and I said I call them no toes, and it's a spring built in. Well, here's one that's extremely eroded. And you can see, I'll show you a closer picture of it, but you can see the springs and the pins and so forth. And there's that strap that runs right up from the heel, the calcaneus. And this is a highly eroded no-toe. Totally different, well, not totally different, but a lot different than ours. Alright, here's the deal. This is my no-toe here. They have that cradle here with the saddle where the bone sits in. The same as like Tish's. This is Tish Egerton. She found a whole batch of these. And these are springs. And they say, oh, those are shells or something. No, they're not. That's the heel of a calcaneus. That is the strap that runs right up to the bone that came down and sat in that saddle. The same as my no-toe. These pins held these springs. That spring would load up this way. There's a pin here that runs to a wire that runs right up to here. When this loads up, it pulls this in. That has to pull that wire. The wire pulls this in. So you load this one up, this one loads up, and you've got springs. That is a tendon. You see this little bumpy looking spot here at the end? That's what happens to tendons when they snap and they wrinkle. This is engineered. I don't care what anybody says. And in our body we have bones, totally different. But it's a no-toe, and it's one of these. Now you don't see the springs on this side all that much, but you can see a little bit on this side, and you see the pins. And this may not even be the same design. I don't know. It looks like there's a pin here and a pin here, so I think it is, but I don't know. This might have been phase 2, phase 3. I have no idea now. I'm telling you, it's out of control crazy. Alright, as you recall, that is the giant callus. It's just a giant callus over that guy's arterial side. So, what happened now was the blood tried to drain through there, and it did filtrate some of it. And you can see there's a whole batch of layers here. But there's areas in here where you could see the metals, because the metals are in your blood. And when your blood sort of settles, they coagulate together, they congeal, they turn into bigger pieces of the same metals. And we'll be able to see gold and so forth in that. Now, up here, we're going to be looking at it in there. Now let me turn the lights off, and then we'll be able to see that exact same spot. I'm not going to change it. Ooh. Alright, here we go. Now, that's the same spot with the lights turned down low. Now, what can we do now? Can we see any gold or anything? Well, not really. However, if we do this and turn the lights down to where we're only getting the really serious reflection of the metals, then we can see gold and silver, and there's all kinds of metals in here. And when you get it wet, let me put a little water on it. This will take a while probably, so I might have to shut this off. But when you get it wet, things come out a lot more. Now, I'm turning the lights up again. Now, all those little shiny spots, most of those are from the actual LEDs that are providing the illumination. So, but if I come off from the side and I use side lighting, different story. Now it's not, now we're actually seeing very illuminated particles. Alright, and those particles are not illuminated for no reason. They're illuminated because they're metals, primarily. Alright, this is where the metals try to leach through the callus. And you can see, as I turn the lights down, there's some very reflective spots, and those are normally metals. But this is what it looks like when body tissue turns into stone. And that's right there. I put a little water on here so you can see it, but this is that callus. This whole thing is the callus. That whole monster is the callus. right? And remember, that was where the black blood, the vein blood ran in, and it's blown back out now because it was so pressurized it couldn't get out through its normal avenue, which would have been this. Now we also have on the bottom, here's one of those little bony spots where on the inside of your toe. You have one too. Now there's this fabric-y stuff that's on the bottom of toes and fingers, and I'll show you this in the microscope. And I have other things here. I have another, just a little tiny one right here, but it has the same things. You see those little fibers in there? I'll show you in the microscope. Alright, we're going to be looking at this fingertip, which is in the microscope. Before we do, I want you to see this. This is what's called grip skin fiber. Alright, now you're going to see it in this as well, even though this is a tiny one. What you saw before over here is from that big fingertip that I said the blood couldn't get out, and this is all the stuff that's in the black blood. Now, this one here, I'm going to move it around a little bit. Alright, right up in here, here's the top of the fingertip, and that's where the blood blew out at the very end, out of the artery. Now, this is so cool, I can't hardly believe it myself. But this right here is where the apical tuft is. You see these cavities? That's where the apical tuft locked in at the very end of the fingertip. You got to take your time and look at this stuff. I see stuff 5, 6 times, and then there's 10 times, and then all of a sudden I see something I never saw before. All right, and the fingernail comes down about there, and then you got a lot of blood here and there all over the place. Now, on the other side, this is the top side, the fingernail side. It drained down below. You see that red stuff right in here? All of that, let me turn the light up a little bit, is blood. The top part is the finger. And then this, right down in this area, is where the blood curdled down from the artery and congealed at the bottom, see it? Let me see. And that's the bottom. You see, you can even see the apical tuft in the bottom too. That round disc right there. I'm sure that's where the apical tuft would have been. Now, this has that little strappy looking stuff too. Now, this is turned very crystallized. And again, this was in some chemistry that allowed the nucleophilic substitution to really invade the tissues and make them quite obvious what they are. All right, and at the very bottom there is a vein and an artery. You see the crystally looking one there? That's going to be the artery. And that one there is going to be the vein, the black looking one. And the crystals are from body fluids. That was going to be a garnet. There's a lot to look at when you start to look in depth. A real lot to look at. As far as I'm concerned, these things all died at the same time. There was big and little and in between and absolutely gigantic. Alright, now that you've seen what can happen, don't forget, this would have been twisted and all the blood ran down to the end of it and ran out through the callus. And, you know, it's the black blood here, sort of congealed here. But this is where it primarily blew out, the black blood. As I showed you, I think I showed it pretty close. And at the bottom there, you can see where that black blood blew out, going backwards. Not supposed to do that. And this is the fabric that they call the tunica that wraps around the bones. Every bone is encased in its own, completely encased in its own tunica. And just to reinforce the tunica claim, there it is right there. You see that little triangle looking overlap there? It looks like a crescent roll. They wrap around and they attach and they sort of glue together along those seams. But the whole entire bone has to be completely separated from the rest of your body. That's a membrane seam. Okay, my friends, as I've been talking about, there was dragons, there was giants. I'm showing all of the evidence. And Apollodorus, in about 400 or 500 BC, somewhere around here, wrote, when the gods had overcome the giants, Earth, who was Gaia, still more enraged, had intercourse with Tartarus, which is hell, and brought forth Typhon. A hybrid between man and beast in size and strength, he surpassed all the offspring of earth. As far as the thighs, he was of human shape, and of such prodigious bulk, he outtopped all the mountains, and his head often brushed the stars. And that is a true statement. Okay, so there is absolutely no question giants were here. And I'm telling you right now, there's no question dragons were here, because that is it right there. That dragon was attacking this gigantic fish. Now, you have Google Earth. I'm not going to go through this again 100 times over and over and over. This is his throat. Runs all the way down across North Africa. This is the runoff of his body, because he's decayed in the desert. And these are the scales of his dragon-scaled throat. And it runs all the way down. And his thighs were of human shape. These are his thighs. And his coils of viper skin. You see that? That's not just sand dunes. That's the skin almost exactly like ostrich leather. And that's on his legs. And he had, they said that they were coils like a serpent. I'm going to leave it at that, but I do want to mention a couple of people. Michael Tellinger is looking into giants, and he's in South Africa, so he's somewhere in that region. And, you know, he's looking into them, but very few people are. So I applaud him for that. And I want to mention one other person. This is another great channel, Woodward TV. And Jay from Woodward TV, I spoke with him a couple of years back, because he mentioned my channel and said, I want you to go and look at this dragon. And that, he was one of the few that would step up for that. And now he has just put out, I guess today or a day or two ago, what you need to know about the Watchers and the Tomb of Giants. All right, and I'm hoping Jay will contact me. Hey, brother, I got a lot of new information, my friend, and I left you a message on your channel. So if you contact me, I'd love it. All right, thanks, Jay. Okay, I'm going to leave it at this. What you need to do is to go to Immanuel Velikovsky and read Worlds in Collision. I do it through the audio, but just listen to this now. This is about the almost impact of Venus into Earth, and which caused our catastrophe, and all the things that I have been showing. And this only happened 3,500 years ago. Worlds in Collision was a bestseller on the top of the bestseller list for 11 weeks in a row, and the academics forced the publisher to pull the book because it was so controversial to them. Now, Velikovsky was a known friend of Einstein. They knew each other. He was a very, very highly regarded scholar until he stepped out of bounds. Now, listen to what this has to say. This is illuminating.
Before fitting the acts of nature into the periods of human history, impelled me to complete Ages in Chaos first.
This is Velikovsky speaking.
I shall employ some of the historical material from the first chapters of Ages in Chaos. There, I use it for the purpose of synchronizing events in the histories of the countries around the Eastern Mediterranean.
Let me just make a mention. He went to all the libraries, all the museums, to all the places where they stored all of these documents, and he found out everybody had basically the same story.
Here, I shall use it to show that the same events took place all around the world, and to explain the nature of these events. The Red World. In the middle of the second millennium before...
I'm not going to drag this out. You're going to have to watch it yourself, because this is quite long. But it's very, very... I can cover every one of these things, and I can tell you exactly how it happened and exactly what physical evidence supports what was written. Venus was literally born out of Jupiter, and that's what, it was a fiery comet, and that's what almost hit us. And it spins backwards. Now, the only way that a planet can spin backwards is because it erupted out of another planet that was spinning this way. That would make this planet spin this way as it left. So instead of going the right way, right-hand rule, it popped out and would be pushed this way and make a left-hand spin, and that's what Venus does. And everybody recorded the same event. They called it the fiery comet. So you're going to have to come up and watch this. But I'm going to be on some shows and things, hopefully, that, questions and answers, because very few people have ever even thought about this. It's so far off the page that I don't blame them. I would never looked at it if I hadn't found what I found. I would have never even thought about this to be impossible. But now I'm finding that evidence that supports virtually every word they said. If you look up Apollodorus, it's just incredible. Absolutely phenomenal what his library holds about these ancient things, about the story about Gaia and Tartarus and Typhon and all the monsters. All appears to be true, my friends. It's a whole new day. Now, I want to make one last statement. I put a video up just to poke the bear a little bit, saying I want my Nobel Prize for light research. Well, I want them to start looking at the evidence I'm presenting. I don't care about a Nobel Prize. It has nothing to do with me whatsoever. And I am not naive enough to think that would ever happen. They run the world. That's the problem. There is where the problem lies. We are subservient to what they tell us we have to say and believe and think, and about evolution and about how the universe expands and even what light is. They can't explain gravity. But they're spending trillions of your dollars and mine to investigate something that I can show. When I did that one on my about a Nobel Prize, I'm showing them. I got this stuff right here, right in front of you. You won't pay attention. To me, that doesn't speak well of the scientific community. And I mean, I'm talking about it long. It's been 7, 8 years now that I've had this evidence. And on the mud fossils, it's been 10 years or more. So this is not like they just didn't have a chance to see it. And I know they were paying attention because I've contacted virtually all of them. And I've been rebuffed and rejected by virtually all of them. Well, from all of them. So that's my last word.